Today we're going to look at accelerationism, and that this can be considered to be the apotheosis of non-thinking. So if you're new to the channel, then we explore what it means to be a consumer by looking at the production process when we're given as credit instruments, demand centers, or potentially through the advent of AI, compliance nodes. I want to explore this theory or philosophy, if you can even call it as such, because it has an influence within Silicon Valley, mainly through Nick Land. I want to look at it in a way that we can give context to it that ultimately substantiates the premise that it literally just reinforces the non-questioning of our way of life. So we all realize that there is a major issue with our civilizational domain. I'm only really talking about the West. As a result of this dying order, we can say, you have radical kind of thought comes to the fore to explain potentially maybe history. So accelerationism is one, say, mode of looking at history. So its adherents argue that we cannot resist the machine, but we must merge with it. We must accelerate, flows of capital and technology and social, say, fragmentation to their absolute limit. And so through that, something cathartic will happen. So we must push, ultimately, what is in train to its absolute limit. And that what is on the other side of some singularity is some kind of utopian Elysian fields. And this is the cardinal error when you mistake a process for the nature of what is the process. Because the engine is not capitalism or is not, say, technology, but is ultimately the discounting machine of money. So we need to explore money, because money as an institution is considerably older than any formation. We could say any capital formation, if you're looking at, say, a Marxist critique of history, as it were. So we could, and as a result, by accelerating this machine, we are not, heading towards some blissful state of unbridled freedom, but that we become an actuaries of a disincarnating creed when we absolve ourselves of responsibility through not questioning the nature of credit when it's given as a means of exchange. So the cardinal error, as I stated, is that money predates capital. Accelerationists obsess over capital, the accumulation of surplus value that we would say defines our modern era, which is very Marxist in its orientation. But what is at the root of the issue that we need to address has nothing to do with capital formation, but the claim that's made on time. And so that what happens when it becomes marginal to totalize the exclusion of other ways of being or doing, or what I have termed as existential totalitarianism. We have to give context to what is the pre-industrial age. So in early social formations, money existed, but time was not yet a thing or a value. And so if it's not a thing or an economic good, then it's not totalized to the exclusion of other ways of being or doing. And so as a result of that, society was not organized around private interest. Because if you think of what happens when you totalize time to the exclusion of other ways of being or doing, well, you're always marginally given to life through the interest that leads. That's the way how you create a consumer or the credit instrument that you're given as. And so that is the economic agent. That is the paradigm. So therefore, prior to the economic agent, you had identity which was connected to roles within a community. And so we could say that those roles were closer to your the existential of your actions. So if you look at the social formations, the people that acted under obviously duty or obligation, kinship structures, the necessity, the actions were performed for their own sake and not for the return that you seek through your actions. So they did not, because people did not operate under the equivalence that time is a value, and that the way how that you equivocate through the marginality of your time, what you're ultimately orientated towards. So it's not what you do, but it's what you get through what you do, which is ultimately being credited as a demand center. But what happened within the industrialization of time, or we could say with industrialization of what I call modernity, that's when the great shift occurred. Because when time became a thing, so it became quanta, so something that you could quantify in reference to an end, then what you've done is you've introduced a value judgment which people acquit themselves of in order to become the principal product or the credit instrument that they will become. And then the way how that they sell themselves on their actions as money making, and so legitimize the use of a credit they are not the originators of. What happens through that process is that the pricing mechanism clears the form of life of the consumer to sanction the way how life is given as a buyer's journey. So you cannot live life other than anything else other than the buyer's journey when the principal product the economy produces is the consumer. That is ultimately what our economy produces. And so therefore we can read accelerationism, and it doesn't matter the variant of it, in light of the discounting the use of money allows, or the fact that when you use money as a tool for thinking your actions, you're discounting the presencing of the agency that you're not credited when you're given as a demand center. So what happens through this philosophy is that it ultimately just accelerates the disincarnating creed of when you spiritualize time. So it's not in reference to capital formation, but it's got to do with that principal claim that's made on time that's transcendent to the way how people sell themselves on what they do otherwise. Because you, through your role, produce the consumer that is always transcendent. And so because money is a tool that discounts life, so discounts the presencing of life that would otherwise not be beholden to the totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, that means to say that your time is always a means towards an end that is circumscribed or is works within a limitation or a constraint. So when you accelerate the logic of money, that ultimately leads to a disincarnating creed. Because if you don't question if you don't question the nature of your status that relates to you, not money, but the way how you're given, that you're credited a limitation of agency, then in turn you won't question the nature of the credit that you use or the goodwill that you extend that allows credit to be marketed back to you to legitimize the totalizing claim that you externalize. And so what happens is that the future that's offered through this philosophy is a singularity, is a metaverse, is some kind of hive mind, is all this utopianism, which is literally, if it's utopian, it's inextricably connected to the fact that when you spiritualize time, you cannot be orientated towards the market for your time. You're beholden to an unavowed utopianism. So if they can't diagnose the unavowed utopianism, then any utopian, vision that they offer is the inverse to it. You're collectivizing a dystopian future that people are the architects of, but because they're orientated through to life through an interest, they externalize what they create, and this is the issue. So through that you can understand that all you're going to do is just manifest the unavowed utopianism through accelerating what is a disincarnating creed. If what's held out through the philosophy is liberty or freedom, it can be nothing else but the caricature of it or the inverse of it. And the way that we can read this is that we're already beholden to a command economy, and we're commanded to produce ourselves as the credit instruments that we're given as. So any kind of offering of what would be post the consumer is taking the credit instrument, so the demand center that you are, to become a node of compliance in what is held out in the great singularity. And so there's no free choice at the moment, because if you don't question whether or not you have a choice on the way how time's given to you, and that's the only choice that you have to consider, then anything that is offered as a choice, if it doesn't address that principal choice, the one that you disavow, then anything that's held out for you is going to immanentize the command economy, or literally what you set and train when you externalize the significance of your actions through an interest that leads. So think of the frame of reference here is in reference to if we accept time as a value or as an economic good or as a resource that's utilised to produce a form of life, what you're accelerating is the maximisation of what is a resource, time, to then ensure that existential totalitarianism has even more a grip over the human being. So this is not freedom. This is absolutely hyper slavery, and this is just going to manifest itself into a disincarnating creed where you are going to morph with a machine and you're going to lose the self, the marginal self, because the self, what it will constitute the human, which, as I say, you're not a human being or you're not a person, you're a credit instrument. So anything that's pro-offered to accelerate the credit instrument that you're given as is literally going to ensure your continued diminution. And so we can look at it from that this accelerationist kind of creed is literally just the apotheosis of calculation. So which brings us back to what Heidegger's critique. Calculation or calculative logic is not thinking. You cannot think life holistically. So think of the context in reference to money as a tool for thinking or money that predates capital formation. So in that way, we could say that accelerationism is not thinking, but is the total abandonment of thinking in favour of pure calculation. And so the way that we read this is in reference to the question of credit. Because if accelerationists never questions the nature of credit, so they never ask the question of why do we need credit? Why do we use credit we did not originate? They are trapped in reference to the derivative claims that's ultimately made on time and the way how the human being acquits themselves of that transcendental truth claim. And so therefore all they're doing is betting on what is derivative to what is primary, which comes back to the goodwill that you extend. So as a result of that, if they don't question credit as a means of exchange or the way how they use money as a tool for thinking, calculative logic, then ultimately what their whole system is a way of discounting thinking, of discounting life, to look at life holistically. This is an absolutely refusal to accept that people in their current paradigm are not people, but are produced as credit instruments, and then what's offered is a way how you're going to be managed in reference to your redundancy. So this is not the birth of some kind of great dawn. You know, anything that's offered, if it doesn't address the principal claim that's made on time and the way how you acquit yourself of that transcendentalism, and so the way how when you clear price clears the form of life of the consumer or the means of your production. And so what you ultimately discount in order for life to be orientated as a totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, then know that you're being sold down a river. And that if you don't address it from the spiritualization of time, then you won't give due consideration to what ultimately you're externalizing, the questioning necessary to see an out.